Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Committee on 1st of February 2022. I'm Councillor Peter Mitchell and Chair of the Corporate Committee. Please note that this meeting is recorded by the Council for live and subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site. I'd just like to begin by asking members to introduce themselves. Can we go around this way?
Raymond Prince, Head of Legal Services and Deputy Monitoring Officer.
Councillor Barbara Blake, Vice Chair.
Councillor Scott Emery, Lib Dem member from Muswell Hill.
Councillor Dawn Barnes, Lib Dem member from Crouch End.
Councillor Mark Blake, Woodside Ward.
Councillor Mahir Damir, West Green.
Councillor Preston Tabwa, Tottenham Green.
Councillor Joseph Ejiofor, Labour member for Bruce Grove Ward in Tottenham.
Councillor Kaushika Amin, Labour member for Northumberland Park Ward.
Councillor Amina Ibrahim, Labour councillor for Knoll Park Ward in Hornsey and Wood Green.
Jack Booth, Principal Committee Coordinator.
Aisha Simsek, Democratic Services and Scrutiny Manager.
Thank you. We have other officers who will be joining online and they will introduce themselves as we get to those agenda items. Item 2 is apologies. Do we have apologies?
Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Berryman and Councillor Rossetti.
Thank you. Item 3, urgent business. We had one late report. Aisha, do you want to report on that?
Chair, we have one late report. Agenda item 9, it's on the proposed renaming of Black Boy Lane. And we also have a deputation in relation to this item. So under section 100B, subsection 4B of the Local Government Act 1972, the chair of the meeting can accept this as an item of late business as a matter of urgency and for reasons of special circumstances. These circumstances were to respond to the requests of the committee made on the 17th of March 2021, 16th of November 21 and 23rd of November, and further to consider the results of the public consultation in a timely manner. The reasons for this urgent report were agreed by the chair on the 28th of January.
Thank you. Item 4 is declarations of interest. I'd like to make a particular point about agenda item 9, but before then, are there any more general declarations of interest from any members of the committee? You want to? Are you, Councillor Ejiofor?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, agenda item number 9 has previously been discussed at this committee. Given the previous discussions on agenda item 9, as a member of this committee, I'd like to confirm for the record that I will be considering the information provided within the reports and make my decision with an open mind.
Thank you. Now, before I invite others to make similar points on item 9, are there any more general declarations of interest? No? Well, I too, from the chair, want to make it clear that given the previous discussions we've had on agenda item 9, the proposed renaming of Black Boy Lane, that I will be considering the information and decision with an open mind. Can I invite other members to make that same point? Councillor Ibrahim?
Yes, Chair, and myself also, given the previous discussions on agenda item 9 as a member of the committee, I would like to confirm for the record that on the item with regard to the renaming of Black Boy Lane, I will be considering the information and decision with an open mind.
Thank you. Councillor Amin?
Chair, I would also like to confirm for the record that I'll also be considering the information regarding agenda item 9 with an open mind.
Thank you. Councillor Tabwa?
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to confirm, given previous discussions on agenda item 9, as a member of the committee, to confirm for the record that I will be considering the information and decision with an open mind.
Thank you. Councillor Demir.
Thank you, Chair. Likewise, like yourself, that given the previous discussion on agenda item 9, as member of the committee, to confirm for the record that I will be considering the information and decision with an open mind.
Councillor Blake.
Given previous discussions on agenda item 9 as a member of the committee, I just want to confirm for the record that I'll be considering the information and decision with an open mind.
Barnes.
Like the others, given the previous discussions on this particular agenda point, as a member of the committee, I will confirm for the record that I'll be considering the information and my decision with an open mind.
Thank you. Councillor Emery.
Given previous discussions on agenda item 9, as a member of this committee, to confirm for the record, I will be considering the information and decision with an open mind.
Thank you. And Councillor Barbara Blake.
Thank you, Chair. Given previous discussions on agenda item 9, as a member of the committee, to confirm for the record that I will be considering the information and decision with an open mind.
Thank you. That brings me to agenda item 5, deputations, petitions, presentations and questions. We have received a request for deputation from Vivek Lihal, Stand Up to Racism, in relation to item 9, the proposed renaming of Black Boy Lane, and it's been agreed with the deputation that they will speak at the beginning of item 9. That brings us to item 6, the minutes of the previous meetings. Can we first of all take the minutes from the 16th of November, which begin on page 1, and confirm that those are a correct record of that meeting? Is that agreed? Great, thank you. And then we have the minutes of the adjourned meeting on the 23rd of November, which begin on page 15. Are those agreed as a correct record of that meeting? Agreed, thank you very much. So that brings us to item 7, the external audit appointment, which begins on page 23. So is Casey Ikegwu introducing this item? If so, can you please introduce yourself for the benefit of those watching and the item, please?
Thanks, Chair. Good evening, councillors and colleagues present here. My name is Casey Ikegwu. I'm the Chief Accountant of the Borough. The report before you is external audit appointment reports. We are bringing this report requesting that the corporate committee members recommend to full council that Haringey opts into the Public Sector Audit Appointment Limited, that's PSAA, arrangements for appointing external auditors for local authorities. Bit of background, in 2016, Secretary of State appointed a PSAA as the appointing person for local authority audits. So they have the responsibility to conduct procurement and appoint external auditors for every local authority. And the first appointing period was for 2018-19 to 2022-23. During that period, they made a formal invitation for authorities to opt into this arrangement, and Haringey, alongside almost every other London borough, opted in. Now that first appointing period is coming to an end, so they are now formally inviting authorities also to opt into the second appointing period, which will last for the next 5 years from 2022-23 to 2027-28. So this report is requesting that you recommend that Haringey join these arrangements alongside other boroughs who have shown interest and who have shown willingness to continue this arrangement going into the future. In this report, we've highlighted the pros and cons of joining this group, and we are recommending, based on the advantages and disadvantage is that Haringey as a council opts into this arrangement going forward, or continue to be in this arrangement going forward. So, Chair, that is just in a nutshell, what this report is about. And just want to quickly point out that we have a kind of timeline for this. Friday, 11th of March is the deadline for us to notify PSA of our intention, whether we're opting in or out. As a result, because this report has to get full council approval, and full council before that 11th of March is the full council of 1st of March. So we hope that if you recommend that we opt into this arrangement, we'll take a paper to full council on the 1st of March. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions, comments from members of the committee? Councillor Amin?
Sorry, I didn't have a question so much as just to say it'd be great if we see the officer next time, and if you could come to the meeting, just because the hearing is better. I struggle with it, really. I'm so sorry, and I don't mean any disrespect, but for me, with my hearing, it just makes it really difficult. Sorry about that.
Okay, well, we'll take that on board if we can. I mean, there is an issue about how many people we can have in the room, which is a factor, but okay, leave that with us. Can I just ask you, Casey, I mean, you indicated in paragraph 4.3 that most London authorities have indicated so far a willingness to continue with the PSAA arrangement. I mean, I looked up on their website, it seems that for the current period, every London borough signed up to PSAA. So your impression is it that that's likely to be a repeat, which rather strengthens the argument for going along with PSAA?
Yes, Chair, that's likely going to be a repeat. In our forum, Chief Accountants Forum we had about 2 weeks ago, we had a kind of survey by raising of hands on Microsoft Team, and it appeared everybody present raised their hands in support of opting in. So it's likely going to be the case that every London borough will be in this arrangement.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions from the committee? No. Isn't it? We need to nonetheless take the decision. So the recommendation is in paragraph 3.1, the top of page 24, which is to recommend to full council that Haringey Council opts in to the public sector audit appointments scheme to enable them to appoint the external auditor for the council and for the pension fund. And that would go forward to the full council on the 1st of March. So is that agreed? Agreed. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you, Chair.
So we move on to agenda item 8, which is the Treasury Management Strategy Statement, which begins on page 29. Tim Mapofo, can you introduce yourself and the item, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good evening to you all. My name is Tim Mapofo, and I'm the Head of Pensions and Treasury here at Haringey. The item I'm going to be introducing this evening is the Treasury Management Strategy Statement for 2022-2023. So the approval of this particular document is actually a SIPFA Treasury Management Code of Practice requirement. So all local authorities are required to approve a Treasury Management Strategy and an investment strategy in advance of the new financial year. So the council itself, in terms of what the document is, just an overview. It outlines the council's borrowing and investment strategies over the next 5 years. And it also seeks to identify some of the risks and the processes in place to try and control some of those risks. The code itself requires the council to have the strategy approved by the body that's responsible for formulating and monitoring the treasury management activities. And given that we do provide this committee with a quarterly update, this is the committee that is required to, or is seen to have that oversight role to be able to approve this document. So the recommendation is for the committee to approve the Treasury Management Strategy Statement and to also recommend for full council to formally approve it. In terms of the actual process that we have here at Haringey, the document has to go through overview and scrutiny council first. It then comes to this committee, and then once this committee has agreed and approved it, it goes on to the next full council committee, the one that goes with the budget cycle. So just for members' benefit, the report did go to the overview and scrutiny meeting, which was held on the 20th of January 2022. The overview and scrutiny committee themselves did not have any formal comments that they would like to put to the corporate committee at this time. However, due to the timing of the meeting, there were a few questions that they requested for further information, which as officers, we agreed to provide to them in writing. In terms of the report itself, just for members, the Code of Practice sort of requests that we produce this on a 3-year basis, but for us at Haringey, we've always sort of chose to do this on a 5-year basis. And the reason behind that is so that it is better aligned to the medium-term financial strategy and the budget report, which kind of has some inputs into this report. So the main contents of the report, they start from page 33. And there are a few things I'd just like to highlight or bring to members' attention. The first one is that the Public Work Loans Board, which is a major source of financing for the council, it no longer allows or is no longer available to local authorities that are planning to buy assets primarily for yield. So this is not a practice that the council has undertaken in the past, and this document sort of reiterates or makes it clear that the council has no intention has every intention to avoid this activity. So that allows us to have access to the PWB loans going forward. In section 2 of this report is the economic context. It's just sort of a background to the economic environment that we sort of find ourselves in, and that the council is going to have to navigate over the next. I think this one is particularly over the next 12 months, and it is provided to us by our Treasury advisors, Alan Close. Just for members to note that in terms of setting this report and some of the assumptions that have gone into this, we have used an average rate for new loans of 3% over the MTFS period. So going on to section 3, which is again on page 35, on table 1 is it sort of outlines the council's underlying need to borrow to finance the capital program. This is also referred to as the capital financing requirement, or the CFR. And as members will note that there is a substantial need for the council to take out borrowing over the forecast period. In terms of section 4, which is the borrowing strategy, this outlines how the authority intends to finance that borrowing. The main thing to highlight to member really is in the strategy section, which highlights the need for us to be able to address the affordability requirements, but also looking to achieve cost certainty over the long term. So essentially, this sort of part of the report outlines that we will need to look at both the long-term options for taking long-term borrowing, but also look at the short-term borrowing to fund any short-term liquidity need that might arise for the council. Moving on to section 5, which is on page 39. This now sort of discusses the council's treasury investment strategy. So essentially, this is how the council plans to invest any income that it receives in advance of expenditure. And just to reiterate to members again that the primary objective remains for the council to prioritize security and liquidity before seeking any financial return. So this is also the required approach by the CIPFA Treasury Management Code of Practice. So just to highlight to members that we intend to abide by that required approach. The rest of the report, I won't go into much detail in it, just to sort of mention to members that in section 9, it kind of highlights how we look to manage some of those treasury management risks over the MTFS period and over the coming year. This starts from page 46, and just to note to members that none of those have changed over the course of from the previous report that would have been presented to this committee this time last year. So Chair, those were sort of the key areas that I sort of wanted to highlight and bring to members' attention at this time. But yes, I'll do my best to ask any questions, to answer any questions if members have any on the contents of the report.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions, comments from members of the committee? Councillor Barbara Blank.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that report. I've got two questions or comments. The LOBO loans, which have always been hotly debated. I know I was reading today that interest rates are forecast to go up again. Is that going to make any difference? Is Haringey, are we thinking about renegotiating or getting out of these LOBO loans, or are we at the moment just waiting to see how things go? And the second question is in terms of the short-term borrowing, if interest rates are due to rise, and I think the Bank of England are due to meet very soon, is that going to be risky? Will our short-term borrowing be more expensive if we do have a fairly high, dramatic hike in interest rates?
Thank you. Tim, can you come back on those?
Yes, so just on the first question regarding LOBOs, so the council actually does have a policy in place in terms of how we would look to repay some of those LOBOs. So we are in sort of constant communication with our Treasury advisors, Alan Close, and they advise us if there are any opportunities for us to be able to pay those loans. At present, there hasn't been any opportunities that will have a material impact on the loans in terms of like the cost over their life. So just maybe for members' benefit, with LOBO loans, there is an option for the lender to raise rates if there's an option for the lenders that they can raise rates, and if they do so, the option is for us whether we accept that new high rate or whether we pay it off. So if that was to be the case, then the council would look to repay that loan. The problem with rates being so low is those opportunities are far and few in between, and the likelihood of any of those lenders to increase those rates are going to be, very, very limited. So with rates going up, we do maybe anticipate that there might be opportunities, and that's something we'll review with our Treasury advisors. But unless the rates are likely to go extremely higher, and that's probably looking at anything over 5%, it's relatively unlikely that we'll be able to exercise those at a rate where the council would get a financial benefit from. So that's something that we always keep under constant review. And if that was the case, we'd again bring it to this committee for approval on how we can repay those loans. In terms of the strategy on short-term borrowing, so I think, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the key for the council really is to try and strike a balance between taking some of that long-term borrowing and also the short-term borrowing. At the moment, we have about 15% of the council's borrowing in short-term, and that kind of allows us flexibility in terms of meeting short-term liquidity needs. So, for example, if we need to make an emergency payment, we can easily access that amount from another local authority. They can lend to us. And those rates tend to be even lower than what the bank rate is. So at the moment, those rates are around 20% if we're borrowing from another local authority for 3 to 6 months. So that's part of the overall strategy. But what we have sort of set is there's also a longer term strategy. So there are sort of different opportunities within the market that cause rates to move. The loans that we get from the PWB, one of their base is the bank rate. So that's sort of the base. And then on top of that, it will be the gilt yield. And the gilt yield is often, it changes depending on economic environment. If there's uncertainty, if there's likely to be another COVID variant, then you'd find yourself in a position where those rates are actually below where they've been historically. So that would allow the council again to be able to lock in that long-term borrowing at lower rates. So I think for us, what we're setting out in the strategy is not necessarily limiting ourselves, but we're trying to work within that framework in terms of like managing the risks going forward. I hope that sort of answers both of your questions.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from other members? Can I just ask a question then about inflation rates? So obviously since the report was written, we've had the December CPI figure, which is 5.4%, so up from the 5.1 reported here for November. So I just wondered whether you felt that potentially had an impact on the prediction in paragraph 2.4 that the peak is going to be around 6%, is the current thinking. And also on the issue of the inflation rate, over the page in paragraph 2.8, it refers to it being 4.9% in November. So that should be corrected to 5.1. I appreciate this is not written by yourself, it's written by Arlene Close, but when it goes to full council, surely we could just correct the figure in paragraph 2.8 so it was consistent with the one earlier in that section.
Yeah, so I think, thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Just to maybe take your second point first, the difference between the two rates is the 2.8 refers to the inflation in the Eurozone and the 5.1 is in the UK. So I think maybe in the report, we might need to make it a bit clearer, but just to reiterate that the 4.9 is actually the Euro inflation and not necessarily the same as the UK inflation. And then on the point around the assumption that it's going to peak around 6%, so this is guidance that comes from the Bank of England themselves. This is the framework that they are working in terms of how they seek to control inflation. I think the next meeting is on Thursday, so they'll be able to reiterate on that guidance further. From what we saw hearing from the Treasury advisors again is that they anticipate that that 6% will be the peak in April. Of course, if that 6% is even higher, then that'll increase the risk that the Bank of England is going to continue to raise rates even further. But at the moment in time, we don't think that will be the likely outcome. But of course, we can't be sure. So the main one to look out for is the meeting on Thursday, where they will be able to offer up more guidance to the market.
Thank you. Can I just ask about the paragraph on negative interest rates, 5.3? I mean, the final sentence does acknowledge that the prospect of that happening now looks unlikely. But I thought the first sentence was perhaps misleading because it says that the pandemic has increased the risk that the Bank of England will set interest rates at or below zero. I mean, wouldn't it be more accurate to say it had increased, but now that risk is diminishing given other trends in the economy?
Yes, no, I think that's a great observation, Councillor Mitchell. I think we can change that to say it had increased. Because the likelihood of that happening remains low. I think the only thing that can take us back to that trajectory is if there was to be another variant, which would be significant, because that would cause the Bank of England to reverse its course. But at this moment in time, that scenario remains rather unlikely.
Thanks. Councillor Barnes?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a bit more around the interest rates, because you talked specifically about the short term, but obviously the forecast is until 2027. And I wondered if any forecasting or calculations have been done around the 6% figure being a little higher or a little lower on either side, because it just feels quite worrying with this amount of borrowing and uncertainty about what on earth will happen in 2027, given what's just happened over the last couple of years.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the analysis itself, it doesn't necessarily include what would happen if inflation continued to be sustained for a prolonged period of time. I think just maybe for context, at the moment, the average rate that you can get for new PWB loans for 50 years, for example, is around 2%. So the 3% is sort of building in an assumption that the rates, we don't expect them to go much higher than they currently are. I think on the last page of this report, there's also an economic sort of forecast that the Treasury advisors provide us with. And that also assumes that the rates are going to continue to increase, but they're not going to go really much more further than further than 2.5 or 2.6%. So in that table on page 54, it kind of outlines the different cases, like the different rates. So there's an upside risk, which is how much higher the interest rates can go. Then there's the central case, which is where our advisors think the rates will remain. And then there is like the lower case, where in case there's some volatility in the market, sometimes the rates tend to be lower than that. So I think it's something that, we do review, but it's hard to obviously focus that much further into the period, given that anything in the short term might have more impact. So again, that kind of reiterates the strategy that we're sort of recommending in this report, where you look at the long-term borrowing, which is at the moment at historically low levels, and take as much of that as we can, but also not take too much, because there is an opportunity. There are also opportunities in the market given changes in the economic environment.
Thank you. Any more questions from the committee? No. In that case, the recommendations are in section 3 on page 29. So we're asked to agree the proposed updated Treasury Management Strategy Statement for 2022-23 and to recommend it to full council for approval. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That brings us to, thank you, Tim. That brings us to item 9, which is the proposed renaming of Black Boy Lane. So we're going to start with the deputation. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello, welcome, Mr. Leehill.
Hi, good evening. How are you? Sorry, just making my computer work.
Okay, just before you start, I just want to explain that you have 3 minutes to present your deputation, and then members of the committee may ask you questions, and the total time for the whole deputation is 15 minutes, including your 3 minutes. So,
understood.
Okay, so if you're ready, please start.
Sure, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I come here really in hope. I'm hoping that you'll take the decision to be on the right side of history tonight. I think this has been an issue that's been before the council and council committees for quite some time now. And I do think there's a momentum and a moment in history that needs to be captured. We've seen a whole number of things resulting from the Black Lives Matter movement following from the death of George Floyd. We've seen a whole number of issues being re-examined, history being revisited in a very positive way. If we look at things like the debate currently happening around the museum in the home in Haringey about the statue of Robert Jeffrey, a slaver. If we look at the fact that the Constant Four were acquitted, I think there is a momentum around actually re-examining what is presented as acceptable in the public domain. And I think the renaming strategy, the renaming policy in Haringey is an instrumental part of that, a key part of that, and I'm hoping that that will be taken forward tonight. I want to say a little bit about Black Boy Lane itself. I know there's some debate about the origin of the name, but I've been looking at some stuff that Martha Osmore, people may know Martha Osmore, has posted when she campaigned against the pub that sits opposite Black Boy Lane on West Green Road, a pub that was known as the Black Boy, a pub that had, I'm not sure I can show you the image, and the pub sign was quite an offensive image of a black male, an African man, so was the pub sign. Now Martha Osmore successfully campaigned for that pub to be closed and reopened under another name. I think having Black Boy Lane still there, reflecting the history that associated with that pub. And as my colleague Nandi said in our presentation to the council back in June 2021, I think it was now, if you look at Peter Fry's work on the history of black people in this country, so many slave owners named their inns, named their pubs the Black Boy. I don't think there can be any sense in which it's a progressive name to have for a pub, for a street, for any other building. And there are other buildings with similar names, which I think I won't go into now. I want to focus on this single issue of Black Boy Lane. It's an issue that, from Haringey Stamp to Racism, we supported the suggestion that the name should be changed to La Rose Lane. Back in June 2021, we've come to a number of committee meetings to talk about this since then, and it seems to me that there is an unnecessary delay in going forward with this now. I've seen the consultation documents. Most of the people in Haringey are in favour of changing the name. Certainly in the ward they are. I know some people on the street have concerns about what it means for them, but I think the overwhelming sentiment is now is the time to actually go with the movement of Black Lives Matter, go with the consensus in society that these things are no longer acceptable in the world that we live in now. I'm not sure they ever were, frankly, but they're certainly not now. And so I'm just urging this committee to not delay this decision any further, to go with be on the right side of history and decide that this name needs to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do members of the committee wish to ask any questions? Councillor Amin?
Can I just ask, do you know of, I think we've got 2 examples in our report of boroughs who have changed names for different kinds of reasons. Just wondered if you had any comments about those, or any other streets that you know that were sort of update, their names are updated, if you like, it's in any way at all.
I actually don't have a specific example in front of me, but the report itself lists a number of names, streets that have been renamed for a number of reasons. If you look in Haringey, the Oliver Tambo Rec is a new name. I know that's not a street, but I think it's part of the same initiative that we want to update this borough, a borough that's a multicultural borough, to reflect the nature of the world we live in now. So I'm sorry, I can't give you a specific thing. Taken a bit by that question. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Blake.
Hi. I wonder if you've got any information you could share with us on the Mayor of London's position around renaming offensive street and place names, please.
There was a decision by the GLA. I'm trying to remember the date off the top of my head about renaming. I think it might even be referred to in the documents presented before you tonight. I'm just scrolling through them. But there is I can't actually see it right now. I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm unprepared for this. Oops, have I lost you?
No, we can still
sorry, my screen cut out. I know that the mayor did initiate a review of names across London, and it was that initiated, I think, the policy that Haringey have about renaming streets and buildings.
Thanks. I've got another question from Councillor Amin.
I was just going to ask whether you think the Mayor of London's position is progressive and reflects more about the changes that are taking place in London, both in the changes of population, but also people's attitude towards racism now.
Yes, I certainly do think it's a positive step, and I'm hoping Haringey will take a similar positive step tonight. I think there is a debate about whether we are trying to whitewash history, if you can allow me to use that term, or whether we are trying to actually correct history. I think what the mayor's strategy about, I think what I read into the policy of renaming streets and buildings in Haringey is actually saying there was a history written by a certain bunch of people a long time ago, and that history doesn't actually reflect the reality of the world they live in, and certainly doesn't reflect the nature of the London we live in now. A multicultural London, a multicultural Haringey, and I think we need to be part of that change, part of that positive progressive change, to actually recognise that the role of some people in history is not to be not an acceptable one, and to have names of streets like Black Boy Lane is no longer, if it ever was, a suitable name for a street in Haringey.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the deputation? No? Yeah, well, can I thank you very much for your deputation, and we will now proceed to discuss the agenda item and come to a decision.
Thank you very much, Chair.
So next I would like to invite officers to introduce this item. Charlotte Pomeroy, can you both introduce yourself and the item, and any of your colleagues who are also contributing on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to the committee. I'm Charlotte Pomeroy, I'm the Assistant Director for Commissioning. I will be introducing this report. Also in the room with me in the virtual room are Stephen Lawrence, Owen Wensley, and Jonathan Unger and Christina Andrew, who've all contributed to this work outlined here. So I'll give a brief brief introduction to the report, which concerns the proposal to rename Black Boy Lane. The report provides feedback on the further consultation which was carried out for the residents and businesses on Black Boy Lane between the 1st of December 2021 and the 19th of January 2022, as originally asked for in the March 2021 committee and followed up at the November the 23rd committee. The consultation took a number of forms. So there was a statutory notice of intention, which was translated into 12 languages and posted to every household and business on the street. There was an online survey, there were letters to residents, there was an opportunity for postal feedback, and there were 3 engagement sessions, 2 of which were hybrid, so allowed for both in-person, face-to-face input and online input, and 1 online session. These were promoted through posters, as well as through the letters that have been posted to residents and through the drop-in sessions at St Anne's, led by our local area coordinator. There were plans for more door-to-door knocking, but in light of the Omicron variant, which sort of flared at just the moment we were setting out to do that door-to-door knocking, we didn't go ahead with that, but we did, as I've said, hold 2 in-person engagement sessions and sort of initiated a range of ways for residents and businesses to respond to the further consultation. The report sets out the nature of the responses to the consultation and highlight that whilst overall there were 78% of respondents not in favour and 22% of respondents in support, that rose slightly to 81% for when with just residents of the street were taken into account. The reasons and the objections that were raised are set out in some detail in the report, and you're asked to consider those as members of the committee in coming to a decision. Also set out in the report are the responses to the previous sets of consultation referred to as consultation number 1 and consultation number 2. So you have the full picture. As we described last time, this consultation was an additional round of consultation, not a substitute round of consultation. We also took the opportunity, have taken the opportunity since the November 23rd committee to review the package of support that was being offered. And we have confirmed that we think it's an appropriate package of support to mitigate against any negative impacts and disruption which might be caused should the agreement be to change the name. So that is a voluntary payment of £300 per household, dedicated support, and that's dedicated support both from the council from a system perspective, but also to individuals to help support any individual work that needs to be done, which might involve some support, for example, around people changing their wills, or if people have particular communication needs, that we would support them specifically around that. That leads me on to the equality impact assessment, which has been refreshed in light of the further consultation. We recognise that there are both positive impacts for local residents of a change of name, as referred to in the deputation, but we also recognise there are some negative impacts, particularly for those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds or older and disabled residents who might find it more challenging to make the changes that are required to the name change in order for their lives to continue in the ways that they have. So we recognise that there might be some additional support that needs to go in for those residents should the proposal to rename be made. Fourthly, I just wanted to set out that whether the decision to rename is taken or not, and sort of linking back to some of the phrasing used by the deputation, we do feel it's really important that we have the strategic framework process to allow residents to explore how their identity is reflected across the borough, in the public realm, in the streets, place names, in how we think about public spaces, statues, public art. So a really opportunity to sort of think through and contextualise both dissonant history, but also to really think about how people want to be celebrated and identified through the diversity in the borough. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on the issues of implementation. The timing has been set out in order to mitigate any negative impacts for local residents in making the changes that might be necessary for the name change to take effect. But there are also some issues that affect the wider borough, such as the electoral register, which we have set out in some detail in the report in terms of changes that would affect the timeline for changing the name. Finally, I just want to draw attention to the appendices set out in the report, which go through the information sent out for residents as part of the consultation, the feedback from residents, but also we've attached for completeness the report and appendices which went to the March 2021 committee. So I think that's all I'd like to say by way of introduction. There are some detailed recommendations just to draw your attention to the need for members to consider the responses to the consultations and specifically any objections raised by residents to the proposed renaming. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Are there any questions, comments from members of the committee? Councillor Edgeworth.
Thank you very much, Chair. I did note that the report has the option to change the name or not to change the name, and obviously we are looking at this and considering everybody's concerns upon this. But can you just take me through page 17 of the report, which is from 5.15, which talks about should renaming be agreed, the steps that need to be taken in order to make this a reality. And it looks like not a lot happens until the summer. Is it really not possible to do it any quicker than is proposed within this document?
As I mentioned, we understand there is some flexibility around implementation, which we can discuss once we've heard what people have to say at the next end. And the setting out in 5.15 is not designed to say that nothing much happens between spring and summer. We would be talking with local residents, understanding their particular issues, making sure that they understand that the decision has been taken, should that be the decision. So we feel that there's some lead into that. Clearly, we're also entering the pre-election period, so just mindful of any sort of constraints on engagement during that period. But we feel that given the issues that have been raised by local residents, the specific support needs that some have had, but also recognising that not everybody has responded to the consultation. So there's some outreach work we need to do as well to local residents to make sure they're supported. So there's quite an active piece of engagement to do before the name change comes in.
Thank you. Councillor Min.
Hello, Charlotte. Nice to see you again. Can I just say I was very, very disappointed with the level of engagement, both the face-to-face sessions and the online sessions, because I can see that you put aside a lot of resources for those engagement sessions and no one attended. And I think it's an absolute shame, because people then don't get an opportunity to think of other ways in which we could have done it, or give feedback, whichever it was. But I'm very disappointed that wasn't done. I don't know whether you think if we had the engagement slightly wider, by the surrounding streets, whether that engagement would have been better, because it seems to me in this instance people made no effort, or you know, I think the way it was done, I don't know, whatever went wrong in the process made it difficult, really. That was one question. And to go back to the table, table 5.12. I'm just looking at it, and it says Royal Mail. There's no charge in making the street name change. the land register, there's no charge to inform them of the name change, and then the council will do a majority of the work with the Royal Mail land registry update through the. I mean, most of it seems to me is quite a straightforward process. Having moved houses and homes several times, I know it's a reasonably straightforward process. The only one that seems to be some charge may occur is updating legal documents. I can see that. So most of the costs, I'm assuming, have been accounted for. Is that correct?
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, and good to see you too. Just on the first point, in terms of more wide consulting more widely, whilst we were consulting with the residents and businesses on Blackboy Lane as agreed, we did actually put posters up in the local libraries, in local businesses, so there was actually a wider group of people who could have attended. I think we have to face the reality that the Omicron variant was probably at its most active over the period during which we were consulting. There was a huge amount of anxiety about whether it was indeed a milder variant than previously, but it was certainly understood that it was as or more infectious. And also, you know, over the winter period, we did try to vary the times to see if we could get more people. But yes, agree, it was there were, you know, disappointingly low numbers came out, but we did get responses through the online survey, of course. In terms of the point about the implementation, I think just on the charging, the sort of the financial side, I think we've acknowledged that the £300 is a voluntary payment, which is designed to sort of recognise the time burdens, the inconvenience and disruption as much as the actual fee repayment. So it's not a compensation added up in that way. It's more for the disruption and amount of time that might be spent, the anxiety, the uncertainty of things are going to follow through, and just a recognition that, and I might call Jonathan in at this point, that sitting behind a number of these name changes are a sort of complex network of domino effects of changes. So things like if you're applying for credit rating and your address doesn't quite match up, then that might affect your credit rating, which might then have a domino effect. So really, it's partly about the sort of network of follow-on systems changes that need to be made in the background. But you're right, most of the actual charges are limited. But what we wanted to do was make sure we were offering a payment to support residents to make the change and recognition of the disruption that it might cause. Jonathan, is there anything further you'd like to add at this point? And could you just introduce yourself to the committee as well?
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm John Unger. I'm the local line charges, property gazetteer and street naming and numbering manager. And yeah, I'd just like to say, Charlotte, no, you covered everything. I think that is it in a nutshell. A lot of the updates for addresses, especially for streets, take a bit of time. But a lot of them are automated as set out in the report.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Councillor Barbara Blake.
Thank you, Chair. In some of the comments from residents who live on the road, they say, and I'm looking at page 93, that the family of LaRose don't approve of the name being used in this way. Has that been, have we had communication with the family? Is this actually true, what has happened? I mean, can you just confirm that, please?
Oh, is it? Oh, hang on. Can I invite officers to respond on this, please?
Thank you. So it is set out in the pack and was presented to the previous committee that there were views from family members in support of the name change, and there were views from the estate, parts of the estate as well, that they're not supporting the name change. So it's a sort of neutral position from the council's perspective.
Sorry, I've missed it in the pack because I only saw the pack when I got here. So where can I just see where it is in the pack? Can you tell me where it is, please, Chair?
Yes, just hang on. Yes, yes. I did want to raise this issue myself. Well, hang on a minute, Councillor Richwell. While we're just searching for that, I mean, as you acknowledged, Charlotte, there appear to be differing views amongst the family. I mean, it's certainly the case that at the time of the first consultation and the first statutory consultation, the only information we had was from the George Padmore Institute, stating very clearly they didn't, that was on behalf of the trustees, that they did not support the name change. And those trustees included the partner of John Larose. And it seems to me a concern that we proceeded with those initial consultations only having an indication that the family or those family members did not support the change. The letter that went to residents at the outset of this whole process said that the name had been checked with the London Fire Brigade as required, but it wasn't checked, it seems, with the family at that stage. It is true that subsequently, for the March meeting last year, there was an additional email from a number of family members supporting the name change. So I understand the George Padmore Institute has recently resent their original email to the current leader of the council, indicating that their position remains the same. So I did want to raise what the implications of that for the council if it were to proceed with the name change.
Okay, thank you. I might ask my colleague Stephen to comment on that. Just to add that we did let both all family members know that the matter was before the committee again in November and invited any comments. So just to note that. Stephen, is there anything you'd like to add from the policy perspective?
Thank you, Charlotte. There is no policy as such. I believe all we have is just guidelines, and the wording of the guidelines suggests that the council may. So it's at the council's discretion as to whether or not to actually seek any consent from the estate. And as has been said, as has been explained quite clearly already, there are members of the family who agree to the name change, and there are some members of the family who disagree with the name change. But what is also important to note is that this issue about the name itself had already been before the committee, and the committee has already agreed at family say consultation stage number 1 to actually proceed with the name Larose. So that decision has already been made by the committee. The decision before the committee now is whether or not to actually proceed with the actual name change.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And can I just confirm it's page 87?
Yeah, 87.
You've obviously got a different version because I was given it in 2 parts, so I haven't got an 87 up. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. I've got Councillor Barnes and then Councillor Demir.
No, it's okay. I was just going to point to the page. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Demir. I just have looked through all of the comments that came on this latest consultation. And one thing that just stood out, and this is a comment, I do have a question, was that those that wanted the name to be changed didn't really leave any comments, whereas those vehemently against it did. And that's something that I think we should take into account as well, because those who do want the change haven't really told us the whys and wherefores of that. So we only have kind of one side of the argument within that feedback, which seems to be about the no, and those people have their reasons and express them perfectly well. But what I did want to look at was that the reason we're looking at this is because of the Commission on Diversity in the Public Realm from the Mayor in June 2020. So if this name change were not to go ahead, will there be others coming forward? What would be the process in the future? Because this is clearly something that is going to come up, whether or not this happens now, and we could be debating the same street or another one or a property or a block of flats or whatever it is. So if a decision isn't made, then if it is decided not to go ahead, there has to be very good reason for that, as there does if there is good reason not to go ahead. But I think this is something that will happen and it will come up again. So what do we do in those circumstances? What are the costs? What can we learn from the boroughs who have already made changes? And I think that's probably a question for the officers.
Thank you. Charlotte, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Barnes, for raising this. So set out in the recommendations is a recommendation that would stand whether the decision to rename Black Boy Lane was taken, or the decision was taken not to rename Black Boy Lane, which is to initiate the strategic framework. So a way in which we could work with local residents and stakeholders to set out how we would want to approach any renamings in the future, to agree what the priorities might be, to agree what other areas of public realm we might want to address, for example, where there are statues, where there is public art, how we want local residents to feel that they can identify with their local area. It might be estate renamings, building renamings, those sorts of things. So I suppose that's what's set out in the report, and take your point that either way, whether the decision is taken to go ahead or not to go ahead today, there's still a need for an agreed process which engages with local residents to make sure that we can have these discussions in the round, that we can pick up some of the points made by the deputation about looking back to history, recognising where there's a correction of history, as I think the deputation put it, but also where we want to celebrate into the future. So looking forward, and that was some of the comments that were made during the consultation, the focus on looking forward as well. So Councillor Barnes, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Councillor Ejiofor.
Yeah, firstly, Chair, I'd like to apologise to Councillor Blake for interrupting her earlier on. Just want to mention a couple of things which are in the report, pages 87 and 88. One of the sons of John LaRose did write to the committee. He said, "For the record, we fully and unequivocally endorse and support the council's proposition to rename Black Boy Lane as LaRose Lane. As a family, and as the heirs to his legacy, we are honoured and proud for his name to be considered. We note how rare it is for a black person to be commemorated in this community in this way. John LaRose was a cultural and political activist, a visionary, an educationalist, a poet, a writer, a publisher, as well as being an inspirational father, grandfather and great-grandfather." That's on page 88 of the pack. On page 87, there is a letter which is signed by 21 of his descendants. I think it is unequivocally clear that the family supports this proposal. But the other issue is, quite frankly, if this council, if Haringey Council cannot rename Black Boy Lane, then the whole process of looking at the appropriateness of street names up and down the country is just a waste of time, effort and money. If you can't rename Black Boy Lane, what's the point of looking at renaming any other name? It's just meaningless, pointless, worthless. This is a really important decision, not just for our community, but it's a way of bringing in and addressing a hurt that has been going on for a number of years. Now, I understand that this is a controversial issue. I understand that some residents desperately want to retain the name Black Boy Lane. But the fact is that it really is time for change. If we were calling a road, naming a road now from scratch, we wouldn't be calling it Black Boy Lane. And we have the opportunity now to make that change and to address that historical wrong. And you know, colleagues on this committee, I
I'm afraid we've lost you from the virtual room.
Yeah, there's a message that the stream from Judge Meehan House has stopped.
Okay, I didn't see that. Thanks.
This is a test. Charlotte, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Clearly hear you. Yeah. Thank you. I can hear Councillor Dufour now as well.
Charlotte, one more time. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We'll resume shortly.
Anyway.
I was wondering if one of you could gather your colleagues, I think. Yeah, where it is here in a moment. How's your job, Chair? Well, I shall start with something.
Your colleagues, our colleagues.
Right, apologies for that technical hitch. We're back with you now. Are there any more questions at this stage from members of the committee? If not, I've had a request from Councillor Hakata, who's a ward councillor. Oh, sorry. Shall I proceed now? Sorry, Councillor Carter, just one moment. I've got a question from Councillor Blake, Barbara Blake.
Thank you, Chair. So we carried out, I think, 2 consultations on this issue, and the residents who live on Black Boy Lane are not in favour of it. If we go ahead with this decision, what are the implications in terms for the council of ignoring or you know, saying that we disagree with the residents? I mean, what will be the implications in other decisions that might be made where we are at odds with residents? How is this going to affect the council and the reputation of the council?
Charlotte, can I?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Blake, for the question. So the issue with consultation responses is that it is beholden on the council to give due consideration to the consultation responses and to ensure that in this particular case any objections of residents are thoroughly considered by the committee. It's not a sort of referendum. It's not a vote where the majority vote wins. It's more a sort of a way of testing the views of local residents in other consultation processes that are carried out. It really is about ensuring that we respond to the areas where there is risk or negative impact for residents, which is why we believe that the support package, so the voluntary payment, the dedicated support to individuals, the changes we can make as a council would mitigate against some of the negative impacts as cited, both by residents directly affected and in the equality impact assessment of a name change. So I suppose it's just as part of how we think about consultation, it's important that the committee, as in any other sort of council body ensures that the responses from the consultation are understood, the range of views are understood, the strength of view is understood, but it still remains the committee's decision as to whether to go ahead with the renaming. I'll bring in my legal colleague Stephen to add anything to that summary from me. Stephen, anything you'd like to add?
No, none at all, Chair. I think, Charlie, I think you have covered the point in a lot of depth.
Can I just follow that up, if I may? Because so we don't have any guidelines or policy about the level of support needed to proceed with a proposal. Because, for example, for CPZs, any proposal to introduce one or change an existing one, we have a clear policy. You must have more than 50% support. In fact, we all got an email today to remind us of that policy. It just seems to me odd that we have a clear threshold for something that's arguably of far less impact than changing a name of a street. And yet it seems we could proceed with this, even though we've got 81% opposition from the residents of the street who responded. So can you just confirm that we don't actually have any threshold on that?
No, that's the case. There is no threshold in this case. I can't comment. Maybe Stephen would like to comment on the wider sort of picture as regards threshold.
Chair, that is correct. There is no threshold. If you look in the report under the legal comment, it sets out what you're required to do, which is to consider the objections received, and which it's a process which you're currently going through now. And ultimately, it is your decision as to whether or not to actually proceed. But there is no threshold in terms of the number of objections, or the percentage of objections, or the number of residents in support. Nothing like that at all. The law doesn't provide for that.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Mark Blake.
Thanks, Chair. With all due respect, I think the example that you give around CPZs is, rather different. I think than in terms of this example. I think clearly there are residents on the street who object regarding the name change and inconvenience that's going to be caused to them, and for whatever reasons. We know the totality of the street wasn't contacted in terms of what's been made available within the report. And of course, there has to be the wider public interest, which for me has to override those concerns. That's my personal perspective on this. I don't think the council can have a ready-made policy ready for every kind of situation and scenario. But as I said, for me personally, I think the public interest issue really has to override the inconvenience that will be caused undoubtedly to those residents living on that particular road. Thank you.
Thank you.
Charlotte,
Charlotte, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in because maybe Councillor Blake, I misheard, but I just wanted to be clear that we did contact every resident, a household and business on the street. So everybody got a letter posted directly to the household, not just to the block, but to the individual flats where those existed, and to businesses. It's just that maybe not every resident or business responded, but I would like to be clear that we did contact every resident and sent the statutory intention notice, translated into community languages alongside the letter outlining the ways that people could respond. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Min.
Charlotte, I mean, depending on what the decision is today, if there is a committee decision to change the name to reflect the kind of sentiment which has been raised at this committee several times anyway, but if we'd make that decision, would you be informing them of all the actions you'll be taking in that list of actions that you have in the report, which says what the responsibilities of the council are to ensure that the fall of and the administrative burden doesn't sit with the residents, it sits with the council to ensure that all the work is done by your team or whoever in the council that you will be nominating. And I think it would be helpful actually to let them know these are the actions that are going to go forward, or once they're taken, whichever. I mean, I would have thought most of it is quite straightforward. Actually, an email to the Royal Mail, for example, isn't a difficult thing to do. So it should be a quite straightforward process. So I think, you know, in some way, and I think taking on board the issue of engagement and the complete lack of responses really from people in the street, and really we want to try and work with the residents to make it less burdensome for them, recognising the kind of views that other people have also mentioned. So the more we can minimise that would be good. So anything we can do to try and take forward the decision in a constructive and a positive fashion would be a helpful thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor. I mean, we'll clearly need to communicate the decision, but also the nature of the support, the timeframes, where support can be sought, what we will be doing, what residents might need to do individually, what support will be available for that. So we'll need to look at a sort of package of how we sort of convey that and communicate that, recognising that not everybody will have English as a first language, not everybody will be digitally enabled, not everybody will necessarily welcome the response, not everybody will know quite what to do. We are aware that we'll just need to work with the local residents really collaboratively to make sure that we can support people in the best way possible should the decision be taken.
Thank you. Can I just ask, possibly it's a legal view, but what constitutes consideration? Because under the 1939 Act, which governs naming of streets, we are required to consider any objections received. And as Councillor Barnes pointed out, quite a number of those who objected set out at some length their reasons. So in what way can the committee be said to have considered those? Because it seems to me the response basically is what we proposed in the first place, which is a voluntary payment and some dedicated officer support. So is that sufficient in your view to constitute consideration? Can I, before I ask you, I think Councillor Barnes wants to come in on the same point.
Yeah, I do. Just to add to that, on the other hand, the people who voted in favour of the name change didn't say anything. So how can we consider what they said fairly with those that speak against it?
Thanks. Can I ask for your views on that?
Chair, I would say on the point about consideration, again, I would suggest that you basically approach it in a very literary way, which is to consider. And that is exactly what the committee is currently doing. There has been reference so far to the objections received. There has been references so far to the feedback following the consultation. So that, in essence, what the committee is doing now is considering the objections. In terms of in terms of say just to go back to the point, Chair, on the issue about the objections, is that when you look at the legal comments section, you see that I've clearly set out what the committee is required to do. The first thing to bear in mind is that the very essence of serving a notice is that is to give the residents the opportunity to actually make their views and the objections known. The statutory language is very clear. I think it's very clear in that people who want to object should be able to object, and also what the statutory language also provides for is for the committee to actually consider those objections. And as I've said so far, that is in essence what you're currently doing now. And the papers before you sets out the range of views and objections you have received, and you're required to actually give due consideration to them before finally making your decision on this.
Thank you. Can I now invite Councillor Hakata, who is a ward councillor and asked to speak on this item, if he's available.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. I mean, this is a deeply anti-racist borough with a rich, diverse population. It's a uniquely diverse population, and that is why we undertook and are undertaking a review on monuments, buildings, place and street names. We're taking a strategic approach for a very, very important reason, that rather than an ad hoc approach of deciding which streets we think on a certain day we don't like. And I'll give you an example for me, which actually, I find personally, offensive. And in the same way as Colston Road may not sound offensive, but once we know who Colston is or was, it is deeply offensive, the name Colston Road, and we do not celebrate the name or the man. Well, Redvers Buller was a general in the King's Royal Rifle Corps. He fought in the Boer Wars, the Xhosa Wars, the Anglo-Zulu War, and in the Anglo-Zulu War, he fought in the Battle of Kumbula. And in Kumbula, 2,000 Zulus were slaughtered, not on the battlefield, they were slaughtered in retreat. They were chased and butchered in cold blood. Now, Redvers Buller is celebrated not with one road name, but two in our borough. The man is a butcher, and yet we celebrate the name. Now, many people might not know who he is, but once they do know, they might choose to change the name of the two names which we celebrate him with. So the reason why we had a strategic review, is to say, actually, it's not okay just to have an ad hoc decision-making process. We need to have a strategic approach to this. And so that's my one complaint. My other complaint is in relation to the choosing of the name John La Rose. John La Rose is a great man, a man that we should celebrate, a black political intellectual, cultural intellectual. He is known by his legacy, and that is important. He's known by his legacy, not by his family relations, but by his legacy, by his intellectual legacy. He's the founder of New Beacon Books. He was the founder of the Black Parents Movement, the International Book Fair for Radical Black and Third World Books, and for the George Padmore Institute. That is what he is known for. That is where his legacy lives on. And the George Padmore Institute wrote to us and published on their newsletter that they were not happy with the change of the name, that they found the process tokenistic. Now, for me, that is of critical importance, that the person that we are naming the road after, that the legacy in which his name lives on, is one that also is in agreement with us on this process, and they have not been. And I think it's, to a certain extent, an air of arrogance to dismiss that, to dismiss the very reason why we celebrate John La Rose's name and dismiss that legacy as unimportant. So that they are the two most crucial reasons for me. Now, I will say, obviously, I am a ward councillor, and I also represent the residents of Black Boy Lane, and they have in total, and as was mentioned by Councillor Barnes, enormous, a large number of comments regarding the change of the name, and none of these are being taken into consideration. So when you add all three layers up, for me, this is hugely problematic, and I would ask the committee to rethink their approach to this and understand that we already are in the process of a strategic review of all our street names, buildings and place names, and that it's in that context that we should change the name. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hakata. Charlotte, anyone, do you want to come back on any of those points?
Thank you. Just to note that the report does highlight that whatever the decision of the committee, it will be really important that we take forward that strategic framework for exactly the reasons that Councillor Carter has raised in relation to ensuring they are responding to all residents across the borough and their views about their environment, how they want to see themselves reflected, celebrated, how they want to address the sort of history of a particular place name. So thank you, Councillor Carter. Very well made points on that. On the John Rose point, I think we've covered the sort of background in terms of the family responses, and then in terms of the consultation, clearly the part of the rationale here is that we have had differing views from across the spectrum, from people who support or don't support the name change for a range of reasons, and we've tried to reflect those in the report before asking the committee to consider these and make its decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Emery.
Thank you, Chair. Just a technical point, really. Councillor Rossetti is not with us tonight because she has fears over COVID. And she was just wondering why she was told she was not allowed to ask any questions over the video, while Councillor Carter was allowed to make a speech to the council.
Well, Councillor Carter exercised his position as a ward councillor and therefore made a request under the, it's I think Standing Order 50 under the committee procedure rules. In terms of Councillor Rossetti, I'll ask Aisha to comment on that.
Chair, just because we've got some items on the agenda. I mean, all three items were decision-making items. So in the past, we have been more flexible in terms of noting reports at corporate committee and other committees. But in the case of having decision-making items at a non-executive committee, and we've used this rule also for full council and also for planning committee, if you're a member of the committee, the member of the public will not know that you're in the room or out of the room. So it's about having the influence. So if you're a non-member, you can ask a question or you can make a query. But it's if you are a member and you're participating online, it does kind of, it might impact on the decision making. So it's in that. But we do use this ruling as well for full council and for planning as well. And I think previously we've allowed, in terms of noting reports, Councillor Rossetti to attend. So that is the reason, and just to make sure the decision making is as clear as possible for these crucial items.
Thank you. Did I see another hand over there? No. Okay. Sorry, Councillor Barbara Blake.
I still want to ask some more questions about the consultation and the way that was carried out. I mean, who made the decision? Presumably the consultation then was borough-wide, because you've picked up on people who lived outside of, who didn't live on Black Boy Lane, addresses outside. So is that going to be, is that setting a precedent for other consultations that go forward, that there is something happening in Crouch End, but the consultation is open for everyone? Is that the norm, and will that be the norm going forward? And I mean, I'm not, Councillor Mark Blake, I'm not having a go at you, but you said the public interest has to override. I assume you mean the consultation outcome. I mean, I'm concerned about that, because otherwise, is this going to lead to residents saying every time there's a consultation, what's the point of us responding to the consultation, because it can just be ignored? So have we always consulted borough-wide on every single thing? And will we be doing this going forward? Thank you.
Charlotte, can you comment on?
Thank you. I will. I'll bring Stephen in as well. So just the decision of the last committee was that we would focus the consultation on the residents and businesses of Black Boy Lane. The previous consultations, and I may get it the wrong way round, but consultation 1 was for all residents and consultation 2 was for the residents and businesses on Black Boy Lane. So it was a decision that was made that we would focus on these in line with the requirements of the laws concerning renaming, but also in terms of the practice from the previous consultation. I think it's fair to say that consultations, have different areas of focus. So for some consultations, it might be that only statutory consultation might be directed at users of a particular service, for example, and therefore it might be targeted in that way rather than for all residents. So I think it's fair to say that there are different patterns of consultation, and we would be making sure that the consultation followed whatever the statutory guidance was, if that existed for that particular case, or looking at what the impacts were across the borough. But Stephen, you've probably got a more articulate way of saying something along this line. Thank you. You're on mute,
Stephen.
Yes, thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, you covered it quite well. The other point to bear in mind, and Chair, is that the statutory provision provides for the council to actually consult with residents, and hence you hear the phrase posting of the notice on the street, and also sending circulars and letters to every household on the street. But I think the challenge for the council often in these matters is that when you have a dedicated web page, and for something like this, which is quite very well known in Haringey, you may actually get the views of non-residents or residents or non-residents actually expressing the views as well, and that clearly reflects the feedback from the consultation. But again, going back to the legal advice here, your primary consideration should be the views and the objections from residents on the street.
Thank you for that. Are there any further questions? Councillor Min?
Just looking, Charlotte, at one of the comments, in considering all the comments, one of them says, I taught in Haringey for many years, was mentored by Sylvia Collicott, a long-time LEA history advisor, local historian and author of Haringey Connections. The name Black Boy Lane and the public house memorializes or whatever, one of these connections that would otherwise have been long forgotten. A sensitive question, no doubt, but something is being lost. No one in future will ask why the street is so named and learn so much about the history of its area. I wonder whether it is worth putting up a thing to acknowledge that this was the previous name, and that the corporate committee on date, which is today, if we decide to changed it for the reasons that we'll have mentioned. But I just wondered if that kind of thing could be considered. The other thing is, I think, many of the comments I say, I'm surprised Haringey has so much money to waste. Black people should be proud of themselves. They're causing racism. You'll be causing racism. Yeah, well, there are some of the comments I have to say verge on being offensive. Councillor Ejiofor, one of them, I think, for example, says, gosh, where is it now? Really, some of the comments are not helpful. Some are like the comment I've just mentioned is about thinking through how we can manage a process forward. This one says, do you want to change White Hart Lane as well? As you know, a hart is an adult male deer and white to boot. We now know that adult white males are toxic, do we not? So everyone should grow up and try not to change history because someone else's feelings are hurt. Black is a colour and should be considered no more offensive than yellow or blue, and dare I say it, white. This is the thick end of a potentially ever thickening wedge. Anyway, what is La Rose Lane? Does it have any historical significance? Is it French or hybrid French stroke English? Bizarre name to sum up. I'm sick and tired of this nonsense. So no to change. I have gone through these comments and considered them carefully. So it is, it is obviously we need to consider these comments and read them carefully. But I just wonder if there is a way of kind of dealing with some of that anger, which seems to be in some of the comments, not all of them.
Thanks very much, Councillor. I mean, I think that's really, really thoughtful. I suppose there's two things. One, the statute requires that we show both names for a period of 12 months in any event. So there will be that echo of the name in place for the first 12 months. We were thinking about, linked to that strategic framework and that contextualisation of how people understand, recognise local history. So I think there is a piece of work to do on how we might reflect the current name, sort of explore ideas about how it came about. As I think the deputation highlighted, there are a number of views about how it came about. So I think there is a piece of work around that, which is about sort of understanding local history, but in that wider context of national and indeed international events. So yeah, really, really helpful. I think in terms of the comments, they do sort of set out the sort of depth of work that there is to do in that engagement and close conversations with local residents around identity and heritage. So I think they're a useful marker of where we are at the moment. Thanks.
Thanks. We've got Councillor Ibrahim.
Yeah, I'd just like to obviously agree with Councillor Amin that I did find some of that quite difficult reading, actually. Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry, yeah, I did find some of that quite difficult reading, and obviously understand that this is a very contentious issue, and I think we need to obviously consider it very, very soberly and consider, you know, some of those remarks that have been made. But at the same time, I think, would you not agree that we need to balance it out? Like, consultation is important and it needs to be taken seriously. It shouldn't be a sham consultation, otherwise there is no point in doing. But at the same time, we have to balance that, I think, also with taking into account and putting it into the perspective of the fact that, you know, most people don't get to decide what the name of their road is. Okay, most people's the roads that we live on change numerous times throughout our lives, through whether it's through our control because we're purchasing a new property, whether it's because we've been evicted, etc., etc. So I think we obviously, in making those decisions, this decision, we need to consider the views that have been put forward to us, but also put it in its perspective and kind of take a balanced view on why it would be, why we should change it, and at the same time consider the reasons why not to, and what that impact is, which has the greater impact. You know, I wouldn't compare it to a CPZ because I think the impact on, and I think it is important that we take into, and I said this last time, I do think it's important that we take into account the views of the wider borough, because it's a shared space. Do you know what I mean? It's, you know, I always say, like, when you're on the 67 bus and you hear, and if you don't live in the borough and you hear that, it wouldn't necessarily have been the case 30 years ago. You may have heard the conductor shouting out the name of the bus stop or the driver, but now it's announced, you know. And if you don't know the context, if you don't know the background, and you've come to Haringey from where the end of the route used to be, it isn't anymore, it stops at Dalston, but from Aldgate, and you've come up Black Boy Lane, you don't know that what the intention was or what the history behind it was. And also, I think it's just taking into account everybody's views, but in the same context, looking at the impact and putting it into its perspective. The names of the roads that I've lived on throughout my life have changed for different reasons, and it is difficult, and I don't think we should diminish the challenge of, you know, changing your you know, whether it's your bank, whether it's your, you know, even if it's your, you know, your Sky subscription, it requires time, and we should properly compensate people for that.
Thank you. Are there any further comments from the committee or indeed officers, or are we ready to move to the recommendations? Charlotte, do you wish to add anything, or?
No, I think the subsequent the questions have indicated that, you know, definitely all read the report and giving due consideration, which was one of our principal aims behind here. So yeah, very happy to move to the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. In that case, can we look at the recommendations which are in section 2 of the paper, and we'll take those one at a time. So 2.1.1, we're asked to consider the feedback from the further consultation. Is that agreed? We've considered that. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. And then 2.1.2 asks us to consider and take into account the equalities impact assessment. So is that agreed that we've taken that on board? Thank you. So 2.1.3 is to determine whether to make an order under the 1939 legislation to rename Black Boy Lane to La Rose Lane. So this is voting on the principle. So can we do this perhaps by a show of hands? Those in favour of making such an order? Thank you. Those against? Well, you have to request individually, as we explained at the previous meeting.
Okay, thank you. Chair, I think because it's such a contentious issue, and I think I've had some abuse on email even for speaking at this corporate meetings, can I just suggest that we have a named vote, please?
I think it was explained, Councillor Min, that applies to full council meetings. At committees, the procedure sets out that anyone who wants their name recorded as voting in a particular way has to make an individual request.
So can I please ask if my name isn't recorded?
Request, Chair, that my name is recorded as voting to support this, please.
Chair, can I request that my name, Councillor Amina Ibrahim, that is recorded as in favour of the order?
Likewise, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Tadwa.
And for me too as well, please. Okay. Mahir Demir.
Myself as well, Chair. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. So that's votes in favour of making such an order. Are there votes against the proposal to make an order? And any abstentions? Thank you. So that is carried. So that's the principle that we've agreed to make such an order. So that brings us to recommendation 2.1.4, which is about, well, first of all, part A, which is the implementation date. Councillor Ejiofor.
Thank you, Chair. I looked through the reports and it seemed like there are a number of things that needed to be done. I was looking at being a little bit concerned that the implementation date was as far back as the 1st of February. Ideally, I would like to find a situation whereby this implementation date could be brought forward a little bit. However, I do, and I would request the opportunity to make an amendment to 2.1.4. And if it pleases the chair, I'd like to just forward that amendment to the committee and read it for you. That the order should take effect from the 1st of February 2023. However, that officers are to use their best endeavours to achieve an earlier implementation date, to achieve the earlier implementation date of the 1st of December 2022. And I'd also like to add a further recommendation, which would be 2.1.4C, that officers bring back a progress report to the committee in September 2022 as towards their their goal, that the goal of achieving a 1st of December 2022 implementation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Mark Blake. Thank you. Can I ask officers whether you have any comments about the suggested timescale there of moving it forward, well, using our best endeavours to bring it forward to the 1st of December, and indeed on making a progress report in September?
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Ejiofor. Yes, we'll certainly make our best endeavours to achieve that earlier date and provide a progress report to the September committee as requested. As I mentioned earlier, there was some flexibility we felt, so I'm certainly happy to make best endeavours for the 1st of December date as suggested by Councillor Ejiofor.
Thank you. Are there any comments from legal or indeed finance on that amendment to the implementation date?
No comments, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes?
Sorry, Chair and Councillor Ejiofor, I completely understand your wish to bring this forward and make it as soon as possible. But the 1st of December, from a personal point of view and from the point of many others, I'm sure, might be difficult with the run up to the holiday period and all the gifts and the cards. And that all went, no, the date to change was the 1st of December, I think, wasn't it? I completely agree with the progress report because it needs to be kept on track. But could it possibly be the 1st of January or something, just so that people can get through that period? Royal Mail had a disaster this Christmas and some people got their various gifts in January. And it's more about trying to make it a little bit better for the residents who are already cross.
Can I just come
yes,
in? Yeah. So I think, and Jonathan may wish to add detail technically, but we would be running a double name, as it were, for a year, just to allow for such eventualities of the Royal Mail not having quite caught up with the change, although we would have alerted them in good time. And the 1st of December has the added advantage of a link to the electoral register update. So I think where possible, we'd be keen to make best endeavours towards the 1st of December date as suggested.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no further comments, we could move to a vote on the amendment. Okay. So it stands that officers will use their best endeavours to implement the change from the 1st of December 2022. So those in favour of that amendment, please show. That's 8. And those against and abstentions. Thank you. So that is carried. So therefore, we need to vote on 214A as amended. Yeah. So we're now voting on essentially the same thing again, but 214A with the amended implementation date. Those in favour? Thank you. Who's against and abstaining? Thanks. So that is carried. We now need to vote on 214B, which is about the support package and the voluntary payment. All those in favour of that, please show. Okay, and those against and abstentions. Thank you. So that is carried. We now have the second part of the amendment, a 214C, which is that we ask for a progress report to be brought back to the Corporate Committee in September 2022. So those in favour? Thank you. That is passed unanimously. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of that item. Item 10, new items of urgent business. Don't believe we have any, do we? I beg your pardon. Thank you for pointing out we've missed out 2145, which, no, it's either way, Councillor Ejiofor. It's either way that we acknowledge that we basically commit ourselves to the strategic framework. Yeah. Yes, that's my reading of it. So those in favour of 215. Oh, okay. So the recommendations, I omitted 215, which applies, as it says, whether we decide not to make an order or to make an order. Well, we have decided. Yes.
Can we just delete not to make an order from 215 so that it is clear? Right, so rather than there being any ambiguity, just delete the phrase decides not to make the decide. So it reads the committee, having decided to make an order, acknowledges.
Well, yes, couldn't we just take it from that in the first line? We are recommending that the committee acknowledge, etc., and commit ourselves to the proposed strategic framework. Yeah, okay. So with that slight amendment, can we vote on 215, please? Those in favour? Yeah. Those against? Those abstaining? Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking for a show of hands. Okay. Apologies. Now, I think we have finished item 9, which brings us to item 10, which was new items of urgent business. I don't think we have any of those. Item 11, dates of future meeting. It's the 10th of March. We've just got one more item, which is item 12, is exclusion of the press and public so that we can agree the exempt minutes. So can we agree to exclude the press and public as set out in agenda item 12? Thank you. So that concludes the public part of the meeting. We'll just pause while the recording